Hey everybody, I'm Anna McEwen. And now for Bob Switzer with the Epic Narrative.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, on the Epic Narrative. We continue to go through rules. I do understand. It is not easy to look at these things and decide to yourself, hey, God isn't about rules. He's about love and life. It's easy to look at these things and go, see, he's all about the rules. He's a master that must be obeyed. Listen, do the mental exercise. Do not let yourself just be taken in by the tradition of all the teachings that so many of us have had our whole lives. Keep going back to Jesus. Jesus summed up all of these rules with love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what all of this is about. If you love God and you love your neighbor as yourself, because you love God, because he is love, and when you love God, you can't help but love your neighbor, and you can't help but love yourself. If you're doing all that, these rules are irrelevant, because you will in essence be doing these rules just because they make the most sense. Because out of love, these rules make sense. They just do. It's a fascinating, beautiful, amazing thing. So now that we come into Leviticus 21 and 22, and the Lord says to Moses, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, a priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean for any of his people who die, except for a close relative, such as a father or mother, son or daughter or brother, or an unmarried sister, or who is dependent on him, since she has no husband, for she has to he may make himself unclean. So basically, the list that we're going to go through here, right, is for the priest's nation, the high priest and his family. They are part of the culture of the people, and hopefully when people watch the lives of the high priest and his family, what they're seeing is a constant reminder to be called up to a higher plane, a higher spiritual level. Now, in the name of this, many preachers have guilted their financial stream of influence, whether it be elders or just a straight congregation, that the preacher, needs to be on a higher plane. And by that, it means the best house, the best cars, the best clothes, because by them being on a higher financial plane, it encourages everybody that someday God could do that for them. And I have literally had those conversations with preachers who come from incredibly blighted areas, poor areas of cities or countrysides, or actually in countries as well, now that I think about it. And they drive a really nice car, and their house is one of the nicest ones on the block, or maybe even not even near the block. It's in the nicest part of the area. And their point is, and they've told me, well, we need to be an example to the people so that they are encouraged. When they see how well they take care of their preacher, then they can be encouraged, and they can show others, look at what our preacher drives. Look at where our preacher lives. This is what God is calling us all to. And at some, I just think they missed the point. I do. I'm not saying they're sinful. I have no idea if the way they're getting the money is inappropriate. That's not my point. But I don't think the principle works in that circumstance. Here, the Lord is calling his nation, his tribe, of priests. He's saying, I'm gonna give you some things that you guys need to keep an eye on, because I want you to be an example of a higher spiritual opportunity for everyone. See, again, so many preachers look at this and say, in essence, I'm at a higher spiritual level than you, the congregation. I'm at a higher spiritual, you'll have to trust me because I come from a higher spiritual plane than you do. Now, they've been taught this. Preachers have been taught this for years. They've been taught it by their, and not just as preachers when they're in seminary. They've been taught it as children in Sunday school that the preacher is at a higher spiritual level. We need to listen to pastor, reverend, apostle, bishop, archbishop. Sometimes they have all those titles. Whoever, in order to do what God wants us to do, because none of us know like he knows. None of us have been connected like he's connected. So we need to do the right thing. And that all feeds into that hierarchical mindset. We've talked about it many times before. I don't know if I've talked about it much in this season, but that hierarchical mindset, regardless of who's on the top, usually it's a single person, but sometimes it's a couple. Sometimes it's a family. Sometimes it's an elder board or a leadership board who's at the top, and whoever's in charge of that leadership board is on the top, and the preacher is just below that doing what they're told in order to keep their paycheck. But that hierarchical mindset is drawn from these principles, but it's not what these principles were trying to get across. The higher spiritual plane was available for all people, which is what the Levites were supposed to be calling people to. It's what every offering was designed to do. It was an offering that was brought so that you could propel yourself to a higher spiritual plane. It was not designed to be there forever. It was designed to get you to a place of confidence and connection to God that you realize you didn't need to bring offerings anymore. You could just have conversations with him. And even in today, where so many people understand that through the gift of the gospel and the love of God through Jesus, they know they can talk to God, but they still have been duped into believing that the preacher is at some higher spiritual plane than they are, and that they can't get there. And that's the bad part, that they can't get there, that they need to continue to be faithful to their church attendance and to tithing so that their pastor is taken care of, and so that they can get their next spiritual step, because they can never obtain the level that the pastor does. Now, to be fair, the flip side of that is a lot of pastors suffer with tremendous isolation and burnout because they're not designed to hold that kind of level, even though that's what they tell everyone they need to be. So they go on these, I know of one preacher who I think he took a year-long sabbatical. He came back for about a year and a half and then took another year sabbatical because he was just so exhausted. Well, honestly, it's in a lot of levels, that's on him. He created the environment, and now he's exhausted by the environment he lives in. There's another one I know who literally, he goes to church on Sunday. That's it. He might show up occasionally for a required staff meeting or maybe a potluck or pizza day or something. But generally speaking, he's at home, doodling around his house, whatever, taking care of his lawn, going to see neighbors. But he's always exhausted, just so tired. So just, can't wait till the vacation, which of course the church pays for. Can't wait for the conference, which of course the church pays for. Can't wait to go to this retreat, which of course the church pays for. It's just bizarre. But he's always tired. Always tired. Why? Because he's put himself on top of a hierarchical system and he can't get down. Because he thinks if he gets down, somehow he won't be in charge. It's a horrible cycle that just breeds burnout. But they do it to themselves because of what they've been taught. I was taught it too, to be fair. Honestly, I was thinking I could handle it on top if I could just figure out a way to get up there. Now, I would love to go back to a church, but none of them know how to run. Very few know how to run without a hierarchical system involved. And so I've talked too much. There's been too much evidence that I would dismantle a hierarchical system if I was ever in charge of a church. I wouldn't do it like day one, but we would work toward it. Yeah, churches are not interested in that. Plus, I'm very old and I didn't go to seminary, let alone the right seminary for whatever church might be looking for a pastor. So who knows if I will ever see that role again in an official sense. And that's okay. Because, man, I'm alive. I am not under the burden of what I was. Now, I'm not saying every church was like that. Just saying the churches I came through, I can't go back. Anyways, enough about your personal life, Bob. On with the priests. Verses 1 through 4. Don't carry dead bodies unless they're close relatives. And then in verse 5, it says, priests must not shave their heads or shave the edges of their beards or cut their bodies. Those were all signs of mourning for dead people. God's basically saying, listen, I'm breeding a culture of life. You literally could spend every day carrying dead bodies. We've got 1 million+ people here. Somebody's dying every day, and they're going to want a priest to come take care of it. Don't carry the bodies around. And don't mourn. I need you to focus on life. I need you to focus on hope and peace. I don't need you shaving your head and shaving the edges of your beard and cutting yourself and giving yourself tattoos because somebody else died. Lots of people are going to die. But that's okay. I need the nation of the tribe of priests to be a tribe of hope and joy. So let's stay focused on good stuff. That's all contained in those verses. Number 9 is a I just pointed this one out. I wrote down very interesting scenario to use. If a priest's daughter defies herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father, she must be burned in the fire. I'm thinking, but dude, like, there's no way God came up with that. Like, I'm sorry. I know a lot of you may still believe the Bible's inerrant and therefore God came up with this scenario, but I believe the Bible's inspired and I trust it, and you know that, and I have faith that it is what it is, and I love it, and I passionately preach it. But that scenario, that sounds incredibly specific. I think Moses is writing this going, oh, I got a great example I'm going to use. And he probably knew the priest whose daughter had been a prostitute. He's like, that girl's nothing but trouble. She deserves to die now. Not in the way that the Lord says it, where sin will eventually cause her death. It's like, no, now burn her. Crazy example. I don't know the story behind it. It's just, but there has to be. I just think there has to be a story. It talks about keeping standards. Priests didn't have to marry, but God didn't want them marrying. He wanted them to have a high standard, because remember, he's creating a culture that's different. And he wanted the culture to be different for the women as well as for the men. He's like, women, I don't want you sleeping around. And we covered that in that other chapter, which was ridiculously filled with sexual activity, I guess you could say. He's like, but men, I don't want you to be with women who have been sleeping around. They may choose to sleep around. You need to find someone who isn't sleeping around. I want higher spiritual planes for everyone. He's not saying I want a higher spiritual standard for you because you're special and you're higher than everyone else. He's saying I want a higher standard for you because people look up to you and I want them to also become like you. Remember, God's already said, listen, you all are holy like I'm holy. Listen, everybody, I view everyone the same. I'm trying to get them, I'm trying to help them see that they can get up here. Verses 18 through 23. Basically, this covers deformities, defects, disfigurements. And what God is saying in all of this is that if these things distract and or inhibit the abilities of a priest to perform their ceremonies, then we need to keep that in mind. It doesn't, like verse 23, yet because of his defect, he must not go near the curtain or approach the altar and so desecrate my sanctuary. I'm the Lord, the God who is holy. He's like, listen, if they're gonna run into the altar and knock it over, if they're going to have trouble picking up the incense without dropping it, if they're going to have difficulty moving about the holy place without falling into the Holy of Holies, these things need to be, these are just practical things. We gotta be careful. We got to be careful of these things. And I would just want you, he gives that whole list. That's basically all he's trying to say. All right, chapter 22. He talks about this, verses 1 through 9. He talks about the duties of a priest. And they were to be more than just religious tasks and behavior. They were to stay clean. In other words, they were to stay in connection with God and help people do the same. That's what it means. It does not mean they were to obey the rules without exception and to, or die because to disobey the rule, they wouldn't disobey the rule if it meant dying, like just die instead, that sort of thing. It's like, listen, I want you to help people understand that this is what they can obtain. This is where they're headed. Now, they easily cover up any uncleanness. They could if they wanted to. They could cover for each other, their family. God's like, I want you to be so self-aware and more concerned about your own spiritual lives than just doing religious ceremony. I want you to stay focused on what's going on in your life. I don't need a bunch of hypocrites out here. And again, even in today's world, very easy for pastors to cover up what they're doing, to cover up their spiritual struggle, to cover up their dependency on things such as alcohol or maybe drugs or maybe porn or maybe, things that are devastating their spiritual alertness. Or maybe it's their diet, their food that they just can't stop eating. And there's so many things that can cause us to become spiritually dull. And the more spiritually dull you become, it spirals downward. You become more and more spiritually dull and more spiritually dull. And eventually you have no clue how dull you are spiritually because along the way, you've just learned to do spiritual things. You've learned to read passages. You've learned to write notes. You've learned to preach sermons. You've developed your preaching style. You've become entertaining. But spiritually, you're dead. And you don't even know it. You're so dull, you have no clue. I know preachers that have gotten caught, in essence, well, not in essence, they gotten caught verbatim, repeating somebody else's message. There's denominations that in order to combat this, right, they've put together outlines, sermon notes, illustrations, and they'll send you a notebook at the beginning of every quarter. Basically, here's your script. Deliver it well. And so they're not even looking for spiritual leaders who are spiritually alert. They're looking for spiritual leaders that are good delivered, the orators, entertaining people. That's it. And a lot of preachers don't even balk at this. They're like, yeah, I got into ministry because it's a good career path and I'm a great speaker. They send me the notes every quarter. I read them over. I make a few adjustments based on our personal circumstances here in the church. And if for some reason I need a different message, there's the internet. People, AI will write a message. I just have to pop in a few keywords and AI will pump out an incredible message. It's fascinating. But that's how they live and that's how they operate. God doesn't want that for his priests. He wants them to be men of integrity, women of integrity. And by that, it means that they lived their spiritual life accordingly. It's, obviously a passion of mine. I'm like, okay, Bob, just relax. Just relax. Verse 10, no one outside the priest's family may eat the sacred offering, nor may the guest of a priest or his hired worker eat it. And then he goes on. If a priest buys a slave of money or a slave is born in his household, they may eat his food. If a priest's daughter marries any other priest, she may not eat of the sacred contribution. But if a priest's daughter becomes a widow or is divorced and has no children, God seems really specific about who can eat this food and when they can eat it. So why? Why was all this stuff supposed to be eaten within a certain amount of time? Why was it supposed to only be eaten by their family? Like, even if your daughter got married to another priest, she had to eat in her own home, not in the home of her father. Because the Lord wanted to create that pattern where the source of sustenance, everyday life, comes from Him. And that source of sustenance was not for many others. In other words, a priest wasn't supposed to become the resource. God was supposed to be the resource. And it was not to become a place where priests would be like, wow, like this is a really good piece of lamb. We have plenty at the house. I'm going to sell this. I got a good friend. I know he likes a good lamb chop. I'm gonna get him. I'm gonna give him a call. I'm gonna stop by his tent, bring him a lamb chop. I know he'll pay me good for it. No, he's like, no, you. If you don't eat if you're unable to consume all that the offerings have given you, then destroy them. Don't sell them off. This is about being a resource. It's supposed to be eaten in a timely manner, because I don't want you to be hoarding things, and I don't want you to get sick out of it either. The priests were supposed to be a continuous testimony of God's faithfulness and provision. Now, to be fair, a lot of people have taken passages like that and turned it into, if you have a pastor who is above poverty level of income, then you've got a pastor who has become an idol. Right? The exact opposite of the last group of people I was talking about. You've got other pastors who will not allow themselves to ever have resources. They won't own their homes. They live in borrowed homes or in, quote, parsonages. That was a big thing when I was growing up. Churches had houses for the pastors to live in, right? And then the pastors would retire and they were literally out on the street because they had nothing to go home to, because the home belonged to the church. And now the church had a new pastor who's moving into that house. Like, the heart of these rules was to create a culture of spiritual leaders who were bringing everyone up to a higher spiritual plane. And part of that was to trust God with their provision. It doesn't mean that they weren't allowed to have money. It just meant that their focus had to be on God. They weren't allowed to sell the things of God in order to obtain that money. Oh man, can you imagine? Honestly, there's a lot of preachers who sell Jesus to get money. I'm just sorry. They just do. That's what they do. Anyways. Let's see. Verse 15, the priest must not desecrate the sacred offerings of the Israelites presented to the Lord. That was a way that meant, selling it, using it for their own personal gain. And then verse 16, by allowing them to eat the sacred offerings and bring them guilt upon them, requiring payment. I'm the Lord who makes everything holy. So God's like, listen, I'm the one who makes you holy. This is a really good phrase, right? God makes you holy. Not obeying the rules that he just went through. Like, he's like, listen, you can obey all of these eating rules. Not share your food with anyone you're not supposed to share it with, not hoard the food, not eat it when you're not supposed to eat it, da 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 da. But listen, I'm the one that makes you holy. The food doesn't make you holy. The rules don't make you holy. I make you holy. And I already declared you will be holy because I am holy. You are holy. I said you're holy. That's why you're holy. It's like Jesus when he says, listen, you are forgiven. You're forgiven because I said you're forgiven. As a matter of fact, he even says Jesus says, you can forgive people. If you say they're forgiven, then God forgives them. This is what we do. We become like God. We release forgiveness just like Jesus did. And here he's saying, listen, I release holiness to you. That's what I do. You don't release holiness. The rules don't release holiness. I release holiness. Now, let's see. There's a ton more about unacceptable sacrifices. Lots of animal rules. Animal rules, that's funny. I'm going to go down to 27. When a calf or lamb or goat is born, it is to remain with its mother for 7 days. From the 8th day on, it will be acceptable as a food offering presented to the Lord. I just find it interesting that the Lord's like, listen, 7 days is enough. You'll know whether or not the animal is going to live or die or is sick or is deformed in some way and is not an acceptable offering. Because of hoarding, right? Some people would be like, I don't know, like it's going to be a year before it's ready. No, God's like, it's ready in a week. If it's good enough in a week, it's good enough for me. And other people would be like, after day 2, things aren't good. Yeah, that one can't be a sacrifice. I have to keep that one in the fold. God's like, no, if it was supposed to be born to be an offering, then by day 7, you'll know. You can't make the call on day 3 that suddenly this is going to be one of your mares or one of your breeders or whatever. Like, you need to give it a week and then do what it is that you're supposed to do. In verse 32, he says, do not profane my holy name, for I must be acknowledged as holy by the Israelites. I am the Lord who made you holy. I am the Lord who made you holy. Me. This rule about God's name, right, is to be experienced in and out of camp. By being students of God, right? You're going to also be kind to others. You're going to be considerate to all men. That's what it means. Do not profane God's name outside. He's like, listen, you need to behave appropriately. You need to behave like your love in camp and outside of camp, because there's always those who are like, well, yeah, I behave like I'm supposed to when I'm in church, and then I behave like I'm supposed to when I'm on the job site. God's like, nope, that's not how this works. If you love me, you are always love. I don't pick and choose the days that I'm love and the days that I'm evil. I don't pick and choose the days that I bring life and the days that I bring death. I am always love. So you need to be students of me. You need to be kind and considerate to all men. You need to be honest and loyal in all your relationships. Honesty and loyalty, trust me, those will set you apart in everyday life. It'll set you apart. And honestly, I still struggle sometimes. There's sometimes I just recently been falsely accused of something. And the person, of course, didn't accuse me, right? They went and talked to multiple other people. Sorry, I don't want to get into it, but it's hard. It's like, you know what? I would like to turn the tables on this. I'd like to have a few conversations with others about this person. I mean, all in the name of, gathering information. Just want to find out what was going on. But I'm just playing games. Love doesn't do that. Be honest, loyal in all relationships. See, this is how the name of God will become renowned and known and praised. This is how the name of God gets exalted by all men. Because if nothing else, They may not invite you to their parties, but they're not going to have a bad thing to say about you. Well, unless they make something up, which in my case is what's going on. But that's another whole issue. God's like, listen, the culture needs to be one that regardless of where you are, you behave like love. Also, it says to give up one's life in the face of pressure of idolatry or adultery. Yeah, those are things that are worthy to die for. To obey God when alone or in public. And public meant basically was 10 or more people as witnesses. This continues the personal connection with God with each person. Everyone is in on this. God's like, everyone is in on this. I'm looking for a nation that is attractive because it attracts people with love and light. I'm looking for a priestly tribe that doesn't exalt itself. It exalts everyone it comes in contact with because it behaves the same everywhere it goes. It shows love and loyalty. It studies who I am. It knows me well. And in knowing me, it becomes like me. And they're kind and considerate to everyone. And they don't give in to the culture of idolatry. They don't give in to the culture of adultery, not because I told them not to, although I told them not to, but because they're in love with me. And they obey God regardless of how many people are around. They can be alone, they can be in public, which is 10 or more people. It's always going to be consistent because the love of God is consistent. This is what's awesome. This is what's awesome about all these rules. God keeps putting in these phrases that let you know that it's not about the rules. He keeps putting in these phrases to make sure we understand as these rules are expressed that we say, hey, listen, if you love God, you won't even need to know what the rules are. If you love people, you're not even going to need to know what the rules are because you're just going to do the right thing. That's the beauty and awesomeness of God's passion for his people. He put within us exactly what we need. He's like, you are holy because I say you're holy, not because you obey the rules, not because of anything other than me. I have declared you holy. And I, Bob Switzer, declare you holy, whoever's listening, because you are a child of God and you are loved by him. And you will be all that you were designed to be because God can't help but move you toward that. Take opportunity to move toward the goodness and wonderfulness of God's light and love, and you will be blessed accordingly. All right. Love you guys. Thanks for coming by. The Epic Narrative. I'll see you next week.
Don't go anywhere. We've got Bob Thoughts.
Well, what are my thoughts here? I hope that last thought didn't throw anybody off there. I think it's important for us to understand that we are in Christ, that we are a new creation. Like it is a dilemma because so many of us, at least for me, my perspective, right? So many of us grew up with this idea that we would forever battle the evil nature within us, that our hearts are deceitful and desperately wicked. And that's what we focus on. And then you always get more what you focus on. You reap what you sow. And then we become more evil and our thoughts become more distracted and less kingdom and less loving. And then we're like, oh, this is exactly what God said I am. But that's not who he said you are. He said you are a new creation. He said you have the mind of Christ. He said you will be holy, not you'll eventually work your way there. You will be, because I declare it. Yeah, that was a very freeing thought for me. And I'll tell you, when it dominates your thought process, it is something that is a revolutionary. If you've been dominated by the idea that you're you're always struggling with evil, and then you always struggle with evil. The opposite occurs when you believe the fact that you are a new creation and that the new nature is your dominant nature. And I'm not saying you don't occasionally trip up, but that's all it is. It's just a trip up. And you operate out of that belief in the new nature, then you start to constantly grow in that, and you start to operate and make decisions out of it, and you flow life freely. I was talking to a friend of mine today, and she was like, this place, she was describing where she worked, and she said, it's a soul-sucking place. It destroys who you are. And I thought, I didn't say this out loud because I didn't want to seem unsympathetic or empathetic with her because she was having a tough day. But internally, I thought, no, that's not it. Like this place doesn't suck my soul. Like you have to be tied into it. Like my soul is tied into an internal source of life and love and joy and peace and hope. So yeah, I have rough days at work for sure. There are times where, people don't cooperate. People are rude and unkind, and they say things, and it's like, you know what? I have to really focus to stay connected to what I know is my reality, because the circumstances want to distract me from my reality. I think of Paul and Silas in prison. They sang, they worshiped, they prayed, because their circumstances were not their reality. Their reality was coming out of their hearts and out of their voices. And yes, they were in a dark place with rats and poop and pee and chains and hunger and discomfort of all sorts. But the circumstances ultimately didn't win. I'm not saying that they started singing when they first got thrown in there. I wouldn't. I'd probably take a few minutes to be like, wow, it is really dark in here, and wow, it stinks, and I don't know what I'm sitting in. But I don't live here. I don't stay here. This is not my reality. This is my circumstances, but it's not my reality. And you can move above it. And that's what I believe, especially the priests were called to do, and ultimately the whole nation, because as you know, I truly believe that the nation of Israel was supposed to draw nations to God, not annihilate them through warfare. And we'll get into that more so next season. I've already started writing that, Joshua and all the battles and et cetera. And it's like, well, I can't get into that. I will get into it next season. Stay tuned to the Epic Narrative. But while we're here in these books of the law, which are a challenge for me, but I think we're breaking through. I mean, we learned a lot today. We learned a lot today about how religion has and quote rules has taken the heart of the Father and destroyed it and turned it into masters and slaves and a ladder you have to climb, and a hierarchy you have to try to navigate and politicize. And it has done a lot of damage to a lot of people's spiritual walk and to a lot of people's churches, because we've stopped operating out of the reality that we are who we are in Christ. So I encourage you this week, keep changing your mind, keep doing that work of the faith, keep growing in your awareness of your reality, and watch it impact your circumstances. And that's my challenge to you. Yes. So we'll see you next week on The Epic Narrative.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to this podcast on any platform you use. You can also reach out to Bob for questions or booking at thebobswitzer.com, or email him at thebobswitzer@gmail.com. See you next week, guys.